and welcome to another episode of my podcast, One Woman is Twice Two Soldiers. I'm your hostess, Caitlin Kearns, and I have 20 plus years experience in sewing with 12 plus years experience within living history. I count it up and I get different years every time, so I should say 12 plus. I think it's 14 or 15 now, but 12 is a good safe number, so we're going to say 12 plus. So this podcast explores things like historic clothing, wardrobes, myth debunking, stories and experiences from the living history events that I have attended, as well as some of how I've incorporated things that I've learned from the 19th and 20th centuries into my modern, everyday 21st century life. So if any of that sounds interesting to you, consider following along. So last time we discussed menstruation and gynecological health within the mid-19th century. Yes, there's a cat in the background. I usually can't shut him up, so he's just, he tells us his own opinions. He's there. But this week we're going to dive into where I find original source material and how I basically conduct my research. So without further ado, let's get started. In addition to the crazy cat that you will probably hear throughout this episode, you may also hear some whirring in the background. We just started incubating some eggs. Hopefully this time works out because I only hatched like 3 last time. I've been doing it since I was 8, so you would think I'd have a better grasp of it. But anyway, we had incubation issues, so that's what happened last time. But the only place it really works to have the incubator is right in my filming corner. So if you hear whirring in the background, I apologize. So a few weeks ago on my main YouTube channel, I discussed the levels of research as told by me with a pretty little graphic that I made that I love so much. And I will leave the video link below if you're interested in watching that. But as a bit of a recap, 4 different phases of being a researcher. And that started with the reluctant researchers, who is not interested in research at all and is mostly just plain dress up. Then there was the lackadaisical researcher, who mostly takes the research of others and doesn't do any or much primary research of their own, and when they do, they look at original sources through their modern 21st century eyes. And next there is the intermediate researcher, who has begun to research things through the correct lens, but they don't know much. And then finally there is the expert researcher, who I think is mostly self-explanatory at this point. But now that we've discussed what makes a good researcher on the channel, I want to share some of my own resources that I use when working through primary sources. So let's start with the free resources, Google Books. I love Google Books. It's free, it's easy to use, it's very convenient. So first you're going to Google Advanced Book Search, and you click on the very first link. It's Google Books Advanced Book Search. And you get a very lovely page that has things like search terms and years, and you can search the publisher, the ISBN, lots of different things you can search. So there are lots of options. I typically leave most of them blank. So I only typically fill in the search phrase and then the target year most of the time. So let's say I was researching ill effects of corsetry like I was last month. So I will type in ill effects corsets, and I will give my target date range of 1830 to 1890. So when you click search, a bunch of original sources. So if you are very interested in this particular title, you can go to a library, or you can see if another website or something has it. I have in the past been able to Google a title and get myself a hard copy, or find it in a library that I can research later. So it still gives you some information, just not the information that's going to help you right away. So if we look at the next source that popped up, it says you can look inside of it. You can tell that because there is a little blurb that you can read inside. So you can see the title, you can see the author, the year published, and a snippet of what your search words found. And if it sounds like something you want to read, you can click on it and you can read that book. So if I click the book and I exit out of the book, I get taken to a main page where I can get more information, such as the publisher of this work, where it was published. You can also download a PDF of the book if it's something you really, really like. You can search inside of it, etc. So we're going to do another one. Let's say I need an illustration for a video. I remember that it's 1859. I remember that it's Godey's Lady's book, but I don't remember the month. And so what I can do, I know it was a working dress, so I can put working dress in the title. I can put Godey for the publisher name, and I can put the time frame as January through December of 1859. And let's see if we get it. Yes, I see in the table of contents. It's on page 73. If I don't want to search, I can go down to the bottom. There's a search bar within that particular work, and I can put working dress, and I just scroll until I find the page I want it. And this is where I get into trouble, because this is where I find that there are rabbit holes that I want to go down. So I want to see this little boy's dress that I popped up. And the thing I don't like about Google Books is that you can't open a new tab because it just shows you the snippet and not the whole page, which is very annoying. But I can click it, copy it, put it into a new tab, go back to that first page, go back one, and then keep searching. It is annoying, but it works. And there's what I was looking for. So I can click it, and there's an image with the description for my video. So now I have my image, the description, and a whole bunch of other things that I now have to research, and at least 2 more projects to do. Yay, but that is how I use Google Books. You do have to play with it. If you're not getting results, try different wording. I have learned personally, for me, because I live in America, that sometimes I have to weed out British sources in much of my research because Britain and America did some things differently. Especially, like, for example, when I was researching natural dyeing, the dyes that are naturally available in England are not necessarily the dyes that are naturally available in America. And so I did weed out those sources so I could specifically look at what I would be capable of in the mid-19th century where I particularly live. So now let's talk about how to use Pinterest, because this is a fun one because all sorts of lackadaisical researchers get themselves in trouble with Pinterest. Why? And it's because Pinterest has no context. We very much stressed in that last video, context is everything. You cannot find primary documentation and not understand the context and say that you understand the source or that it's proving something that you want proven. It doesn't work that way. You have to understand the context behind everything. And Pinterest has no context. It's just pretty pictures with no context. And I'll show you what I mean. So I'll just go to my boards. Yes, my feed is mostly 19th century dresses. I don't think that should surprise anybody. Well, let's go to my 1850s board, and then I have subboards to organize things. Definitely use the boards and the subboards to organize things if you're using Pinterest. I'm going to go to fashion plates and lithographs, and I'm going to click the seamstress because maybe I want to find more period images of seamstresses. Let's say I want to find things from the mid-19th century. So if you go underneath the pin that you found, you will find similar pins. So already I see one. And it's labeled 1863. That actually helps me a lot. It's very important to get as much context as you can. So I can save this to 1860s, and it looks like I already have it saved. But let's go ahead and go underneath this second pin. So right here I have another one of ladies sewing, but there's no context whatsoever. So here's what I do now. On the bottom right of the pin, there's a magnifying glass. I can click it and adjust the crop tool as needed. Sometimes you'll get the same result more than once, and the second pin will sometimes have more context. It does not look like that's happening this time, but instead I have found 2 more old-timey images of women sewing. Now, the first one, because I have done this before, I can tell is later than 1860s. So if I'm specifically researching for pre-1865, I don't want to save that one. But again, there's no context, and it's with the other mid-19th century images of women sewing, so the unsuspecting person may save that thinking that it fits in that same area because obviously it's with the others. Now I do have the artist name with this one, so although I don't have any real context, I do have the artist name, which is helpful. So I can Google this artist in the words women sewing, and look at that. First result, it's an .org address, so I know it's more reliable than a .com address. And it looks like this was painted in 1877 to 1878. So yes, too late for what I'm researching. But if I do happen to study that time period, and in fact I do, I could save that image to my 1870s board. I'm personally not, because I can see that it's British, and I am trying to weed that out, because specifically within the 1870s and 1880s, I do only West Frontier stuff, particularly in West Texas, for that time period, and that is very specific, so I don't want any British sources that may be slightly different from what I'm researching. So back to where we were going before, the other one I pulled says 1860, and there is a title. If I wanted to know the artist, I could Google that, and underneath it there are more images of mid-19th century women sewing. There are seamstresses and there's the dressmakers, although the last one does look more 1870s to me, and I could research that further if I wanted. But I wanted to show you how much better results you get if you started with someone who actually gave you a starting point than if you just willy-nilly just search Pinterest. So let me just try a general search. I'm going to try 1860 cotton dress. So let's just say I'm just getting started and I want to see what those look like. Okay, actually I'm very impressed because the last several times I've done these general searches, I've gotten just Etsy and Amazon ads for very incorrect dresses that's zippered up the back. But now we come to a dilemma, which is which ones do we save? So this first one is from Kent State University, and at least I can get somewhat reliable information from there if it's an actual source where the dress belongs. And this next one is extantgowns.com, which is a person who takes originals from eBay and then analyzes the photos. It's not a bad source from what I've seen, and I have found her thoughts to be mostly correct. But again, there's conjecture about her not actually seeing the gown in person, and so there is a sticky point there because you're taking someone who's analyzing photos without actually studying the dress, and so there's again a lot of context missing from that. Now, if you're far enough along in your own research journey to where you can categorize that garment, go ahead and go for it. If you're a newbie, I would probably stick to more museum pieces, or at least conjecture from people who have actually handled the garment. You'll get a lot of blog posts that use photos as documentation, but again, without context. So I try not to save those if I can help it. I do try, for the most part, to get back to the original poster or uploader when I can. Pinterest, I find, is only a good tool if you already know what you're looking for and what you're looking at, because the context is lacking. But again, that is how I use Pinterest, and I do find it useful to save images. And then I have things for a decade, and then I have one board for researching multiple decades, which if you click that, I just store overarching themes that I find that are somewhat difficult to research, such as breastfeeding throughout the ages. I have a board on homespun dresses because I want to research homespun dresses specifically for the 19th century. And then I have a board full of mid-19th century menstruation products, etc. So I do have some that are more general because I'm researching a particular topic as opposed to a specific year or time period. So now let's talk about HathiTrust. It's Google Books, but for scholars. It's actually, it's kind of like an online library, essentially. So it essentially compiles original books and literature and all sorts of other things, like sheet music and, again, all sorts of other things. And they store it, and it comes from various libraries or universities, and they store it in one place. So it's like a giant online library, and I don't use it too much except for the vast collections of ladies' magazines. And so there's nearly every single Godey's ladies book on here, and then also most of the Peterson's magazines. And so I will go in there and search things. I find it harder to use than Google Books, so if I can find things on Google Books, I will use that. But because HathiTrust has all the Godeys in one place for me, I tend to go to ladies' magazines specifically for HathiTrust. Specifically through HathiTrust, before I'd go to Google Books. So you have to join HathiTrust. I believe give a donation to be able to download the books, but you can save the pages one image at a time as a JPEG if you're really into that. So if you feel like you need just a few pages, that works. You can also search things through the books, which is a feature that I like. It's great when I'm searching something for like an embroidery pattern from say 1855. I can go in and I can search embroidery and see what pops up, and just find one that fits my project. But if you know the information that you're looking for, HathiTrust is a great place to go. I've specifically been researching Red Cross through World War II, and so I can search Red Cross and filter my dates and find all sorts of original publications that help my research. So it's, again, the online giant searchable library. So those are the ones that basically are free for the most part. So let's now talk about two local resources. These are probably going to cost some money. At the very least, they're going to cost you in gas. But a lot of museums have entrance fees, which you should pay, even though if you're researching, unless you're told otherwise. Most places in most areas of the world are going to have tiny local museums, and most of them will gladly allow you to view or examine their originals if you call ahead and schedule a time with the curator. When I worked at museums, that was actually one of my jobs I would do occasionally, was to pull artifacts for researchers and then stay in the room to kind of safeguard that artifact. Because I was museum staff, unless it was a well-known person who was researching, usually I'd be the one who handled the artifact, and the researcher got to take photos and such, but I was the handler, and that varies by museum policy. Most museums also have a research room, and you can find some really cool stuff, like maybe local memoirs or diaries, and things of that nature. If you're willing to do a bit of travel, you can go to museums that are even further out. So for example, if I was looking for early 19th century original dresses, I'd pull up my closest museum, I'd ask to speak to the curator. Some museums don't have a curator. They're going to have maybe a collections manager or a museum director or manager. Just kind of call and ask them who's in charge of the collection and ask to speak to that person. Very small museums, it may be entirely run by volunteers, in which case you're just going to talk to whoever's on the phone with you. And you're going to introduce yourself, say that you're researching early 19th century clothing, and ask if they have any extant garments that fit within your date range. I would highly suggest giving them a date range. And then ask what their policy is on researchers coming in to study. If you can, schedule a date and time and ask if there's anything you need to know beforehand, such as do they allow photographs of the garment, or do they have photographs that they will print out for you that you may have to pay a small fee for. Things of that nature. Ask who will be handling the garment, if you'll be allowed to take measurements, etc. Day of, you'll want to bring a good camera, a charger, a computer, or if you don't want to take notes on a computer, you can take notes with pen and paper, with a pencil and paper, that's fine. I would bring a tape measure as well. And it doesn't hurt to have some clean cotton gloves with you, but museums will usually provide them if they require them, and some museums will only allow you to use their gloves because they use special detergents. Other museums will just let you handle the garments willy-nilly without gloves, which in that case, I would suggest very clean hands and be very gentle and respectful, but take advantage of that opportunity. I would do it. I know people who are very much anti using the hands. I use my very clean hands on all of my original garments, and I've never harmed an original garment. Personally, I find that if I'm wearing gloves, that's something that separates me from the original garment, so I may not notice if I'm pulling on something a little too hard, whereas I could feel, if I have the garments in my hand, I can tell how sturdy they are, and I'm generally far more careful with them if I have my hands on them. But again, if you have the opportunity to handle something without gloves, be very, very, very gentle and do it as briefly as possible. But yes, I take advantage of that opportunity. Write down any notes. If you're studying a garment, I do have a resource on how to study an original garment. I have a whole video on it, as well as a printout for you that you can document all the things that you need to document. For other researchers are going to have their own printouts and systems. This one's just mine, and if it helps you, use it. If it doesn't, use someone else's or create your own. There's no problem with that. One thing about local museums that I have discussed before, and I'll say it again, they will often use family lore as their documentation, and it's not always reliable information. That circa 1850 gown from the collection may actually be 1880. Just be wary. This happens especially when the original garment was made in 1850 and then it got remade several times to keep up with fashion, and it ended up in an 1880 style. But because it was originally made in 1850, people say it was made in 1850. It's just a whole issue, and then sometimes things are just miscorrectly interpreted. You may have people misremember things, and I know we've talked about this on the channel before. So it's just something to be very wary of, and to make sure that you are getting the correct information. I would highly recommend that if you're writing anything down, do it in pencil, especially because it's not generally a good idea to have pens around extant garments. I have done it before. It's just not generally recommended. So it's always good to have a pencil anyway, and that way as you learn more and you start researching and digging in, you can go, okay, that was actually not 1850. Let's cross that out and write probably 1880 because of this reason, and this reason. And so you can reevaluate things as you learn more. So maybe you did accept the museum's information 5 years ago, but now you know more, and you can more easily change it if you do it in pencil. Other really good resources, which are kind of on the same level as museums, would be libraries and universities, especially local ones. They can be really good resources for original text. So often these resources are non-checkout, so that means you have to go into there and you stay there with the material. You cannot leave with it, because these are often very old books and papers and letters, and so you have to request access to them and study them in-house. And this whole conversation reminds me, I need to contact the Rice Library. I need to contact Rice and to get my hands on those original Gross papers I keep telling myself I'm going to do, and I never actually do it. Actually, I think there's a group of us who are going to do that. We need to make that date. There's also a diary that I need that's in an Austin university. Anyway, some of these places do have entrance fees, and some of them require a membership card to view the resources. So definitely just call ahead and get your facts straight and get everything handled ahead of time, so when the day comes and you want to research, you can walk in without any hassle and actually do the research. And again, that saves you on time and gas. Other resources that you might find in local places, like birth or death certificates or marriage certificates. County records sometimes keep these. Old churches can sometimes keep these. It's always worth calling and asking, just so you don't waste any gas. A lot of places actually don't have the resources anymore due to floods or fires or what have you. But if they have them, some of them are willing to let you access those records, sometimes for a fee, sometimes for free. It kind of depends on the institution and what the policies are at that place. And that kind of leads into online family research tools like Ancestry or Family Search. They can get you a lot of good information on people specifically, and sometimes you can find photographs and stories, but again, kind of remember my warnings on family lore. Sometimes things get misremembered or told wrong, so I'm not saying using them is wrong, I'm just saying be careful and don't hang all your hats on that one hat stand. These tools specifically can be very useful to determining where people lived, how many people were in family units. A lot of old census records are there, how many people were in a household, how old people were, etc. So again, just very clarifying information on those sort of things. That's where you're going to get your good information, is Ancestry or Family Search, or other ways you can get. And so finally we get to the books that I own for research. And to be honest, I don't have a ton. I mean, I have a lot, but I really don't have a ton, because most of what I do use Google Books a lot because I can search them and it's easier for me to research through them. But I do tend to collect diaries from the mid-19th century, a focus on the South and a specific focus on Texas, because that is where I live and that it makes most sense for me to research, because that's where I tend to do all my events, either in the Deep South or in Texas. And diaries, I find in particular, are very helpful with like snippet, how things were done type things, and the most random things are written about. So I find the most interesting information in those. And then I have some memoirs as well, and that is something to note. So diaries are better than memoirs. Diaries and journals are better than memoirs. Memoirs are people remembering things from many years prior, and so things get misremembered, things get forgotten, things get, you have other outside influences such as, did that really happen in 36 or was it really in 38? And things get just confused. And so memoirs are useful in a way, but they're not as good, I guess, of resources as a diary or a journal, if that makes any sense. So I will go through the books I have, whether they're diaries, journals. I keep some fiction books that were written in the 19th century. I do have some non-primary documentation books that I have used for research, or at least have given me a starting point. So we'll go through those as well, just one by one, just in the library, so I don't have to take all of them out of the bookcase. Would be super helpful. And I'll kind of tell you the title, what kind of resource it is, the author, and then kind of a brief summary of what it's about, if that makes sense. Alright, starting off, we have Evolution of a State, which is Recollections from the Old Texas Days. It's by Noah Smithwick. Actually, I've not read this, but a secondary source, which is probably why I haven't read it. Samuel May Williams, who is an early Texas entrepreneur. This is written by Margaret Sweat Henson. Also, have not read this one. I'm not sure if this is actually mine or Rhett's, but it was in there. It's early Texas, so it's going to get a mention. Bernardo, which is a book on the family I used to docent for. Their second plantation, which is Leyendo, is where I docented. Most of my information is on Bernardo, and so I have this whole book on it, which actually does have a lot of the primary sources I've actually found in other places as well. But there is that one. Emily Austin of Texas. This is just by Light Townsend Cummins, and it's a biography essentially of Ms. Austin. This is called Jane Long. It's she's considered the mother of Texas, and so we have a portrait of her, and it's by Catherine Troxel Gonzalez. And funnily enough, this one is actually in a school library, and the school was shutting down. It was actually my school that I was teaching at, and they were merging with another school in the district. So they were told to get rid of a lot of their library books because there was two libraries went into one, and they wanted new books and all that. So they got rid of and discarded a lot of books. This is one of them. I actually have not read it. It's very much written to children, and it's in the version of a story, so I'm not entirely sure how accurate it is. But it's on my list of things to read. It'd probably take me like 5 minutes to read it. It's a very small book, but yeah, that's there. History of Brazoria County, Texas, and the plantations there. This is by Mary Nixon Rogers, and it's really not very detailed. It's literally a list of the plantations, and then like a small blurb on each one of them about who owned it, what they grew, basic things like that. I found it very useful when I was doing first person for Sarah Wharton, who lived in Missouri County, and they owned a sugar plantation. And so it was very nice to kind of know who the neighbors would have been and what they grew and a little bit about their families that helped flesh out my persona a little bit, which is why I have that one. This is An Empire for Slavery, specific to slavery in Texas. So it's 1821 through 1865. That's Randolph B. Campbell. I have not read this book, but it had a really nice picture of 1830s African Americans on it. And I was like, oh, well, that's fun. So I bought this because it's Texas specific. Have I read all the way through it? No, but it is Texas specific, which is why I have it. Austin's Old 300. This is about the first families in Texas. It's written by their descendants, and it's edited by Wolfram M. von Mazwiski. Anyway, so has like maps of the land grants and all of that. Very good early Texas information. Women in Early Texas by Evelyn M. Carrington. I have also not read this one, so also a very older book. But I also it's kind of like a little mini biographies of a ton of different women. And they had some pictures in here of the women that I have not seen. So that was nice. And some women I haven't heard of. And so this was an interesting book to me. But that is basically Texas-specific resources that were not diaries. Alright, diaries and memoirs specifically to Texas. So this is Tinting on the Plains. Elizabeth Custer, General George Armstrong Custer's wife, wrote diaries. She followed her husband around. And this is specifically not just Texas, but like Great Plains area. They spent some time in Texas. That's why I included it in this list of books. But yes, it is by Mrs. Custer, and it had some very interesting information. So again, the plantation I just ended at, Leando, Mrs. Custer stayed there because she got sick when they were camping on the creek. So Mrs. Gross invited her in, and she stayed at Leando. So that was an interesting information. There's a little bit more information about the Grosses specifically in there. They're not mentioned by name necessarily that I remember. It's been a while. But I also got some really good just general information from Mrs. Custer. So that was fun. Interwoven is a Pioneer Chronicle by Sally Reynolds Matthews. And so this is just a memorial, like memoir type book. This is the diary I was speaking of earlier. So Another Year Finds Me in Texas by Lucy Pierre Stevens. It is edited by Vicki Adams Tongate. And so it's a Civil War diary by a northern young lady, so she's a Unionist, who came to visit family in Texas and got stuck here during the Civil War. And so she's writing about the war stuff in the South from a northern point of view, but she has her southern, I think they're cousins. One's a generation above and one's like her age. And their diaries are somewhere in Austin, I believe. And it's on my list of things to go look at and research further, because I think it'd be very interesting to see the different points of view. But basically the same story because they're in the same household. Okay, this is the Memoirs of Mary A. Maverick. And it's arranged by her and her son, who is George Madison Maverick. Yeah. So that's a little bit on the later side as well. I think it starts in 1838. Yeah, a lot of these I'm trying to get information on Texas for 1830s. So that one's good for like that mid Texas, Texas as its own country phase. That's a good one. Recollections of Early Texas, Memoirs of John Holland Jenkins. I don't know why I have this book because it's not a woman, and I don't think I would actually ever read this. Because let's be honest, I do mostly research on women. I don't care about men that much. There's so much research about them and so many people who focus on them and no one focuses on the women. So I figure that in that vast ocean of research that there is to do, I would rather focus on women because not as many people focus on them. And I feel like they're just as important. So that's me. So this is Maria von, I think it's Bolchers. She was from Corpus Christi, Texas. So it's letters to and from her. It's from 1849 to the 1870s. And so letters I love. I love reading letters. They're so much fun. And so it's just basically letters to family members and all that sort of thing. So that's a lot of fun. And then I have Mary Austin Holly. This is a biography of her. It's by Rebecca Smith Lee. It's a nice large book, as you can see. But again, it's a biography. It's not first person. So I have not read this one. I've read a lot of the first person ones. Victorian Lady on a Texas Frontier. So this one is a journal, which is kind of fun. It's edited by C. Richard King. I think that's end of my Texas Diaries. These are my other diaries and letters. Alright, The Children of Pride. I just got this one. It was a deaccessioned from a library. So it's Georgia and the Civil War. It is mostly letters and diary entries. I think it's mostly letters, actually, just from various family members. And it's edited by Robert Manson Myers. But it's a very large book, as you can see. I want that one on the bottom, that's why we went to that first. Okay. This one is the Civil War memoirs of Elizabeth Custer. So, Sing Lady from Tinting on the Plains. But this is during the Civil War. She did not come to Texas in the Civil War. So, but I do have this book as well. Ah, yes. So Much to Be Done. This is Women Settlers on the Mining and Ranching Frontiers. This is an interesting book. So it's compiled by a lady, several ladies. Ruth B. Moningham, Susan Amridge, and Christiane Fisher Didrum, I believe is how you pronounce that. But it's several different diaries from several different women throughout the 19th century and in various areas. And they just but they're all about the Western frontier. So women from the Western frontier in various eras. And then it's just, again, all these different women. And you get to read their diaries. So this is with a Carrie Williams diary that I alluded to a lot in my first 2 myth-busting videos because we love Carrie Williams around here. Her diary from 1858 to 1859 is in here. And there are so many, let's see, how many women are there? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19. Looks like there's 19 or so women. Their diaries are in this book, and I have not read through all of them because some of them are later than what I would typically go for, but it is on my list to read through everything. But I have read through, of course, Carrie Williams' portion because I love her. Growing Up in the 1850s, the Journal of Agnes Lee. This is, edited and with a foreword by Mary Curtis Lee DeButts. So this is about Robert E. Lee's 5th child. It's her journal from the early 1850s. So that's kind of a fun one. It's an autobiography, All the Days of My Life. Amelia Edith Huddleston Barr. This is her story. She was born in 1831 and passed away around 1920-ish. But this is her autobiography. So again, not as great as a diary, but it is still from that first person perspective technically, although it's not a primary resource. It says Broken Burn. This is Kate Stone's journal, which is Civil War, I believe. 1861 to 1868. It's edited by John Q. Anderson. This one I have read, but it's been a really long time since I've read it. Because on my journals I will never get rid of, the ones that I actually use for research purposes, I do mark in them, so I highlight a lot, so I can tell if I've read a book, even if I don't remember it, because there's highlights everywhere. And why, I don't even know. But so that's on my to reread list. A Diary from Dixie. This is Mary Chestnut's journal, which I do enjoy. It's Civil War as well. A lot of my journals and stuff are going to be Civil War. So she has a nice thick diary. I like the big ones. The longer I have to really get to know a person that I'm reading their diary, the better. This is The Uncompromising Diary of Sally McNeil. She is also Civil War and Reconstruction era as well. It's edited with an introduction by Jenny McNeil Raska and Mary Lynn Gasaway Hill. This one is fun. This is the dress diary of Mrs. Ann Sykes, sorry. So this is an interesting lady who in, I think it was 1838, received a journal, and she decided to keep a dress diary. So she put swatches of all her fabrics that she used in her dresses. So we have like her dress fabrics as well as when they were used and that sort of thing within all this. And a lot of this isn't necessarily her journal. It's a lot of a long forward by those who are editing and all that sort of thing. But it is still really interesting because you can see the swatches and all of that. So this is a fun one. It was just recently published a couple of years ago. So this is a fairly new one. I haven't read it all the way through, but I do have it. The Alexander letters. This is a family's letters from the 18th century all the way through 1900. This is a fun one. I do like reading letters. This is A Woman's Civil War. It's a diary with reminiscences of the war. It's from March 1862. So it's by Cornelia Peake MacDonald. It's another one I have not read. I keep buying diaries and I keep telling myself I'm going to read them and I don't have the time to read them. So that is that. Kind of on the same wavelength and note. It's not... This is even the abridged version. So this is what got me into history, was the Elsie Dinsmore series. And it's interesting in the terms of, you don't use it for research. I find it fascinating, and I like to read the original source material, way more than the abridged version. Although the abridged version makes a little bit more sense for children because there's some interesting things that Miss Finley wrote about. Anyway, so this is, I believe she was a Northerner, Miss Martha Finley. She was the daughter of a Presbyterian minister who saw the world as very, and we see the Victorian era as very pious and godly, and she saw a lot of sin and destruction in the world, and so she wrote a heroine that was essentially perfect, which I find interesting, but and it's set in the South, and it's the plantation era, and you see her whole life. The books, I believe, were originally published, was it 67? It was late 1860s. I want to say it was 67, so just after the American Civil War. It starts off, from what I can tell, in the 1840s. It goes all the way through the late, and even into the 1870s, and I believe the last versions of them were actually published in the early 1900s. But it's very interesting to see how degenerate Miss Finley thought the world and what she thought was sinful. Anyway, I find it very fascinating, and it's an interesting, it's almost like a memoir, but she's not writing about her life experiences. She's writing about what she thinks those in the South were experiencing, and it's very interesting, just from a 19th century perspective of this is how someone's looking back on the past, but not even how she lived, but how other people's lived. I find it fascinating, but that's just me. So this is Autobiography of a Spoon. Going back to the family I used to docent for. Again, I have a lot of information on them because I specifically researched them, and I docent at their plantation, and I portrayed several members of the family when I did first person stuff. This one is specifically the story of Sarah Wharton, who their family ran Eagle Island Plantation. It's a good family history. It's written by her great niece, Sarah Wharton Gross Burleigh. Yes, Sarah Wharton Gross Burleigh. Who, this is another one I have read extensively and marked up all over. It's fun. This is a lot where I've gotten a lot of my information on the Grosses specifically, and it's fun. So I like this book. This is probably useful to absolutely no one who doesn't live in Texas, but it's called Texas Wildflowers. It's by Mrs. Johnson, and Mrs. Johnson her husband was in the Army just post Civil War, and went to a lot of Texas forts. She was an amateur botanist, and she loved watercolors. So she watercolored a bunch of Texas wildflowers. Whenever she came across a wildflower, she would just paint it, and she gave a little description about, the name of it, where it grows, any other names that the natives call it, things like that. And it's so much fun. I just find them absolutely beautiful, and I love her little transcriptions, and it's interesting to see the flowers that are still around today. And Texas is very well known for its wildflowers, so it's a lot of fun. Alright, specifically, let's go into researching on clothing, which I don't have a lot of books on, because I tend to like to go to the original sources, which would be ladies' magazines and journals and that sort of thing. But what I do have, I have one basic book on women's shoes, which is dating. It's late, basically it's 1800 through 1930, sorry. And it is by, I'll get this written and illustrated by Nancy E. Rexford. But I like how she has soles and just the shapes of them, and she has them dated. So I appreciate that. Alright, the way they were dressed, 1860 to 1865. This one, I know a lot of people recommend this book. It's by Donna J. Abram. I believe there's a second version of this book as well. And again, I know a lot of people recommend this book. And it's literally just, photographs from 1860 to 1865. It's good for a couple of reasons. It is good if you're trying to learn how to date things. It is great if you just want some inspiration. There is absolutely zero context on any of these portraits. There is often zero dating information. There is no information on who these people were, where they lived. There is nothing. There is no context. They're great for pretty pictures. And if you already know what you're looking at and you just need to see something very, very basic. Or if you want to just see some general hairstyling, it's, again, very general and, again, no context. So I don't recommend this one. What it can be good for is when you're deep into research and you're doing something ridiculous like, can I count just in general how many dresses close up with the front with buttons and how many do not have button closures, and I can take a quick ratio. It's good for little things like that. Victorian Jewelry by Margaret Flower. This helps me date a lot of my jewelry pieces and know what I'm looking for. Umbrellas and Parasols. This is by Jeremy Farrell. It's a good one on dating parasols and such. It's one of my research books. I do have the history of the umbrella as well. I have no idea where that book is. It was written in 1864, so it's actually a period source on parasols and umbrellas, which I kind of enjoy. All right, now we have my largest genre, which is textiles and sewing. Believe it or not. So I've not read this one, Empire for Cotton, A Global History by Sven Beckert. This one, specifically about homespun, The Age of Homespun by Laurel Thatcher Earlrich, I think is how you pronounce it. But it's nice, it's specifically about homespun. I have more weaving and stuff, but I think I got mixed up. So we're kind of just going in order because it's a really big pile. I don't want to break anything and anything fall in my incubator. This is a white work, and it's by Laurel M. Horton. It has just pictures of white work and just who did them. Sometimes it has information on the type of white work it was. Not a lot. So it's not necessarily the most interesting book, and it's not a very educational book, if that makes sense. But it's an interesting one if you're into white work. Tatting. I think I have 2 books on tatting, maybe. Maybe it's my only one. I can't tat. I have tried it over and over. I've tried through YouTube videos. I've tried it. 4 different people have tried to teach me. I have tried books. I have tried all the things, and I can't tat. Like an extant chemise that's tatted. It's very similar to one of my chemises. This is more of a modern book, creating an antique look for hand hooked rugs. It has some interesting pictures of antique, rugs, which I do like. I'm trying to get into making rugs. That's why I have that book. I have a couple books on rugs, such as punch needle rug hooking. And it's like a how-to one. A very modern book, but at least helps me with technique, which is why I have this one. I have another one down there as well that I think is the best one. This is canvas work from the Victoria and Albert collection. So it's literally just pictures of needlework and the patterns as well, some of the patterns. So that's a nice one if you're into anything with canvas. 19th Century Embroidery Techniques is a really nice book. I think it's nice, by Gail Marsh. There's also the companion piece of 18th Century Embroidery, which I do not own. I thought I did, and apparently I don't. But the reason I like it is it does have some very nice directions on how to do the antique stitches. Very simple. They're not just photographs. I think it's easier when they're drawn out like this to be able to understand what everything is. And they have projects in here. I'm trying to find one specifically. So like one day when we get down to like 1820s baby stuff, like there's an 1820s couple of baby dresses with the embroidery patterns. It has close-up of the garments, it has history of the garments. I think the drawings of the garments are very useful, at least to me. Elephant's Breath and London Smoke, it's literally historic color names. So if you ever read Godey's Lady's book and want to know what a color means when it says such and such colored silk, this probably has the answer and a nice little description. So if you ever wanted to know what Perkins Violet is, it's mauve. And that's super helpful for when you want to know what colors mean. This is, I think, my good book of rug hooking. The Complete Book of Rug Hooking by Joan Moshmere. It has designs and how to do it, as well as some history behind it. This book I was very disappointed with. It is a very expensive book. It's Embellishments, Constructing Victorian Detail by Astra Schaefer. It was touted as a here's how to trim your reproduction dresses using historical techniques, which is kind of what it is. The problem is they said Victorian, and they said that would be good for mid-19th century as well. There's like one dress and like maybe 2 techniques you could use for mid-19th century. that very heavily focuses on the 1880s and the 1890s. It's somewhat in the 1870s too. If you do that time period, this is probably a really good book. If you do earlier, I wouldn't recommend it. This is original book, so Art of Dressmaking. This is a 1920s book. And I have it just so I can learn 1920s dressmaking techniques to make sure I'm getting my techniques right. Civil War quilts. If you're into quilts and you do American Civil War, this is a decent one. I have to put these up in a second. So it has, oops, got the wrong page. It has the quilt, history of it, picture of it. It does have the quilt patterns in the back. So if you're interested in quilting during the 1860s time frame, this would be a decent one. It has some really nice pictures of fabrics. So if you want to learn how to date some fabrics, that could be super useful as well. 50 heirloom buttons to make. Nancy Nearing. This one is only good if you're trying to find techniques of things you already know about. So I use some of these techniques on parasol tassels. Some of the decorating techniques work for those as well. But you already have to know, because some of these are great for 20th century, some of them are great for late 19th century. They don't all fit with every time period, if that makes sense, to apply these techniques. But it's written in plain language, very easy to understand, gorgeous pictures, step by step, here's how to do something. And so if you already know what type of button you want to make, and the directions are in here, this is going to be a good resource on how to do the actual thing. Early American Weaving and Dyeing by J&R Bronson. So this is a reprint book, I think from the 18 teens. But it's all about dyeing and weaving. It has some weaving patterns in it, like different things like carpets and coverlets and patterns. This is one of the books I got when I am going to start making coverlets on the loom. It's like 3 projects away from what I have on the loom now, but one day we're going to start making coverlets on looms. This is one of the books I got for that. The other book is American Woven Coverlets by Carol Strickler. This one I love if you're into coverlets, because not only does it tell you how to figure out what type of coverlet you have, it has not a lot of dating stuff, but some dating stuff. It has practical how-to. It has all the patterns that you want, and it has how to do it, how to put it up on the loom, how to weave it. All of that information is in this book, and it has tons and tons of different patterns. So I have found this useful even I had a friend who asked me, hey, do you know what pattern this coverlet is? And I was able to figure it out from this book. So very much recommend those books. Hands to Spindles is Texas specific, so it's home textile production in Texas up until the 1880s. I have some thoughts that maybe these are kind of cherry-picked sources, and it's not as common as the author would like you to believe, but it does have some really nice early period sources. But again, they're taking from memoirs, not necessarily actual diaries, and right there, boots on the ground sources. It's somewhat romanticized, people telling of their past. Loom and Spindle, this is about the Lowell Mill Textile Girls. It's by Harriet H. Robinson. It's about some of the girls who worked in that mill. America's Spinning Wheels, this has helped me learn my spinning wheels, learn what was common here in America. Not necessarily good at dating, but it helped me learn the types of wheels and that sort of thing, so that was a good one. The Pictorial Guide to American Spinning Wheels by D. Pennington and M. Taylor. This is a really nice book. I like this book. Textiles in America, 1650 to 1870. There are not as many pictures as you would like, but there are some pictures. But there's a lot of just words and descriptions of the types of fabrics. So if you wanted to know what something was and you couldn't find it online, sometimes the type of fabric is written out exactly how they would have described it. So that has been helpful to me for that reason. This is a modern book, but A to Z of whitework. There's a couple different period, like here's how to do A-shirt embroidery, which is very a specific type of embroidery. And it tells you the stitches that you can use with this type of embroidery. A lot of the historical context is not in this book, but if you know the historical context and you're looking on how to do the stitches, This is an excellent book. Very clear step-by-step instructions that are very easy to follow. Old Time Tools and Toys and Needlework by Gertrude Whitting. It has all sorts of needlework tools, what they looked like by date, so I can see what's appropriate for what time period. If I'm looking at antique sewing implements, to figure out what would be appropriate for me to bring to living history, this was a good one. Another one was Textile Tools of Colonial Homes by Marion L. Shanning and Walter E. Shanning. Same thing, it's specifically colonial time period. Whitework Techniques in 188 designs, selected and edited by Carter. It's somehow of how to do the embroidery. There is no historical context within any of this, so some of this is mid-19th century, some of it's early 19th century, some of it's mid-20th century. And there's no context. If you're here for pretty white work and you want to just learn some of the techniques to do on some modern stuff, this is the decent book. Victorian Alphabets, Monograms, and Names. This is edited by Rita Wise, and it's just from Godey's and Peterson's. You get them for free online. If, however, you are looking for a very specific name or a specific alphabet to embroider, this is nice, except for the fact she does not tell you what issue it was found in. So you can find your name in here, but it may not be appropriate because you may be looking at an 1880s illustration when you're trying to do 1850s. So it is always better to go to Godey's Ladies Book. But if you're looking for something pretty and you want something that's Victorian-esque to embroider or whatever, this is a good one. I have my 3 books on side saddles. All about riding side saddles, a modern book. Side Saddle by Jane Pryor, also a modern book. This is Riding Habits of the Era of the Hoop by Heidi Marsh. This one's specifically about period riding habits and riding boots and all the accessories. And so if you're mid-19th century and you're looking at riding stuff, this is a really good book. There's also an 1837 whole book on ladies riding and how to pick a good horse, and here's all the tack that you need, and here's what saddles look like, and here's how to ride. But that's I can find that on Google Books. But this is a good compilation of just period sources of writing habits. I didn't want to go and find them. But again, you can find them all for free online. So there's that. No Idle Hands, A Social History of Knitting by Anne L. MacDonald. It's a large book I haven't actually read. This is volume 1 of the Encyclopedia of Victorian Needlework by C.F.A. Caulfield. It's, again, just types of embroidery. Here's how to do them, but very little pictures on the how-to part, but it's good for, like, dating information. Umbrellas and Their History. Hey, look, this is the period book I was telling you about earlier. I have, like, 5 more books to get through, and the AC just kicked on. I'm going to go ahead and do it. I'm sorry for the background noise. This is one of my colonial books I'm looking at now. What Clothes Reveal is put out by Colonial Williamsburg. Hey, look, it's the book that got me into historical fashion. Antique and Vintage Fashions is by Barbara Johnson. It's a decent book. If you like pretty pictures, this is the book for you. It's literally just pictures and then what it's sold for. And again, very little context. I have a book specifically on lace fans. It's by Ann Collar. And I love it because it has directions on how to make the lace. Do I do lace making? No, but it's really pretty and I love the patterns to it. And back on laces, Needle Made Laces and Net Embroideries by Doris Campbell Preston. It's how to make lace, specifically the ones where you take the net and just embroider over it. And Victorian Canvas Work by Molly G. Proctor. So it is a lot of, again, canvas work. So pictures of canvas work, what you can do with canvas work. I don't think it has any patterns, but it's really good history of it. And canvas work is literally cross stitch, mostly, and half cross stitch on canvas and wool. So you don't really need a whole lot of instruction with that. If you stuck around to the very end of this video, thank you so much for doing so. Again, I know these kind of get long, but hopefully you learned some things in the process. And with all that being said, thank you so much for joining me today. If you've enjoyed the video, please like and subscribe to the channel. Click that little bell notification so you're notified anytime I upload a new video. And as always, have a fantastic week, and I'll see you back here in the next video.